In terms of gaming, ever since the harshness of reality hits me, I have slowly turned into a filthy casual. That or I am not much of a hardcore gamer as much as I was back in my unproductive high school years. But if I am still about as hardcore as I was back in my high school years, looks like I would be classified as having a disorder, as the World Health Organization have classified my behaviors as a gaming disorder. This has been a topic of discussion for quite a while actually. The last time we talked about this was actually last year. But the reason why I don't talk about it that much last year is because they haven't officially classified it, and there are so many people who are skeptical of this classification, including experts on the field. And rightfully so. I think this should be labeled as addictions in general instead of merely gaming, because there are so many things that can be bad for your health if you're addicted to it, like gambling or Netflix or possibly hentais. But now WHO has classified it as a gaming disorder. There's an article that explains it in detail and what the classifications actually is. I highly recommend you to check it out. I'm gonna sum up my discoveries that I find quite relevant for the topic to provide you all the context for this conversation. At June 18, 2018, the International Classification of Diseases 11, also known as ICD-11, included gaming disorder as one of their lists of mental health disorders. The diagnostic criteria include a pattern of persistent or recurring gaming behavior, which may be online or offline, manifested by 1. Impaired control over gaming, 2. Increasing priority given to gaming to the extent that gaming takes precedence over other life interests and daily activities, and 3. Continuation of escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. In other words, you will be classified as having a gaming disorder if you cannot control your gaming habits, if you prefer playing video games than any other daily activities, and if you keep playing video games despite the negative consequences that occur in your life thanks to playing video games. Keep in mind that all of these classifications uses the AND operator, which means that all of them have to occur in order for you to be classified as having a gaming disorder, which means that if you have no control over your time playing video games, but you're still able to do other daily activities and you still have good grades or something, then you don't fall under the classification. As you may already tell, the classifications are quite vague, and this is why there are so many academics from many different universities that reject this classification. Unlike the Diagnosis and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders 5, also known as DSM-5, where they have internet gaming disorders still requiring further study and therefore no one can be classified as having one yet, once the ICD-11 is implemented, you can classify someone as having a gaming disorder. The problem is, there's little to no research backing up this classification. No, seriously, there's none. It's one of the many big problems that a lot of experts on the field have with this classification. We're gonna get into that shortly. Thankfully, despite the ICD-11 being released this week, the implementation of ICD-11 will not take place until further years in the future, as evidenced by how ICD-10 was released in 1992, but America did not transition into ICD-10 from ICD-9 until October 1st, 2015, which means that you won't be classified as having a gaming disorder until probably in the next 10 to 20 years. And yes, the classifications are still incredibly vague, which leads to so many people in pretty much all sides to argue to please, for the love of God, clarify this. In the last article I showed you, of course there are people who are against it, which argues that the current move to classify gaming as a disorder is far too premature, because there is a significant lack of research, over-reliance on using the gambling criteria, and someone who plays video games could also be suffering from many other mental health disorders. But then we also have people who are for the classification to be put in place, except the reason is not what you guys might think. Their motivation is not because OMG gaming is evil and it's destroying society. The motivation is to make sure that there is an official definitive diagnosis for one to suffer a gaming disorder, and help people who legitimately suffer from it so that they can't be put in ridiculously stupid addiction boot camps that can potentially and actually have killed people. I actually agree. If you're gonna classify gaming as a mental disorder, at least make it clear in what the symptoms are. The for argument is about fixing the classification, which pretty much anyone can agree that there are certainly tons and tons of things to fix. And yes, gaming addiction is a real thing, and there are people who legitimately needs help from it. It's just that there needs to be further studies, and there should be clearer diagnosis for the people who legitimately suffer from it. So that's pretty much the content and the entire context of the ICD-11, where the gaming disorder is classified. Once again, you can check out the article down below for further details, but it's not my video if we're not talking about journalists, and journalists certainly have tons and tons of hot takes on this issue. First, let's go to BBC's own take on this matter, which happily includes a video.
Like millions of young people, these friends spend a lot of time gaming.
Okay, BBC, now I want to ask you guys, why would you ask these children's playtime based on weeks?
I usually spend about 20 to 22 hours a week on gaming.
Maybe it's a British or Western thing, counting based on weeks, but I just personally don't see the productive benefit of counting someone's hobby based on their weekly playtime. The only reason why would you ask someone based on their weekly playtime is to artificially inflate the number so that it sounds big. For example, Evan here plays video games for 22 hours per week. Now that might sound ridiculously many, that is until you count it per day basis and you find out that it's actually not that many, and he's been playing video games for approximately 3.14 hours a day. That is not an addiction, that is normal. And he doesn't even have to play games for 3.14 hours straight. He could be playing in 3 sessions, 1 hour each. Let's get to more of the kids' examples. Scott plays 25 to 30 hours per week on Xbox. That's about 3.5 to 4 hours per day. And it's not necessarily one straight session. Evan plays about 20 hours a week at gaming, which is around 3 hours per day. Saul plays Fortnite for about 20 hours and FIFA for 5 hours per week. Respectively, that's 3 hours of Fortnite per day, and if he gets bored, around 45 minutes of FIFA. So BBC, please spin this into ridiculous proportions.
For these gamers, it's a harmless escape from reality, but the World Health Organization has created a new classification of gaming disorder with 3 characteristics.
We have already discussed these classifications and how incredibly vague they are, something that a lot of academics and experts on the field have argued and agreed that these classifications should be fixed. That and the disorder is not going to be implemented until 10 to 20 years in the future. There are certainly people with genuine gaming addiction, but to classify kids who play games for 4 hours a day as most being addicted to video games is a freaking insane thing to do, BBC. This is not what the WHO classified, and this is certainly not what the gamers would think as someone having a gaming disorder. That's really it for this BBC video, and this video really doesn't tell anything other than painting anyone who plays about 4 hours a day as having a gaming disorder. There is one really insane take, which brings us to the good old days of the 90s.
WHO's ruling on video game addicts could help prevent mass shootings.
Wow. I mean, wow. I have never seen such magma level take on video game addiction than this one. Are you implying that people who have gaming addictions might become a mass shooter? And yes, by the way, that's the actual freaking descriptor of the image. Gamers being hypnotized by the screen at the E3 conference, but it's perfectly fine for people to get hypnotized by late night shows. As if the headline doesn't sound insane enough, the content of the article is actually even worse. It's so bad, I'm surprised that the article doesn't start off by saying, "Those academics are wrong."
Not surprisingly, the gaming industry pushed back hard against the WHO, calling its rationale deeply flawed. But studies have shown that electronics activate pleasure circuits in developing brains. They also compromise decision-making, leading to cognitive issues and delays in neurological development.
That's right, the writer doesn't even entertain the idea that the WHO diagnosis is incredibly vague. You don't need to be an academic or an expert on the field to see that the classifications was incredibly flawed. Not that academics or experts didn't consider these classifications to be flawed. Yeah, screw those people. Deeply flawed my ass. Here are a couple of studies that show that electronic entertainments are bad for you. Bad. And if that doesn't sound insane enough, let's get to the part where the writer insinuates that video games assist mass shooters.
After Adam Lanza shot and killed 26 people, including 20 children, at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012, investigators discovered that he had prepared for the massacre by playing video games about a school shooting and about a civilian massacre of women and children at an airport. He had notched 83,000 virtual kills.
Well, someone played the No Russian scene. 83,000 virtual kills. Adam Lanza, you freaking pleb. I can pick the most casual of Counter-Strike gamer on planet Earth, and even he has a higher kill count than your peasant ass. And writer, your argument here is that Adam merely learns how to prepare for school shootings thanks to playing the No Russian scene. Not that video games will cause potential school shooters, which you implied in the title. You might as well accuse plants for providing him oxygen, and they have an even bigger impact on his life than video games ever could.
Today's violent video games are much more immersive and hyper-real than Pac-Man, addiction psychologist Nicholas Carter has said. That doesn't mean all those kids are gonna turn into school shooters, but they mimic the toxic imagery they've seen on screen.
Ah, yes, video games do not turn people into school shooters, but they will make kids to mimic the toxic imagery they see on screen, like pointing a finger and mimicking a gun. By the way, that's an actual story.
The WHO's action could thus have a big impact and possibly help prevent tragedy. Not only could gamers now seek treatment, but more therapists could provide specialized care, and insurance companies could even cover the disease.
Nope, ICD-11 will not be implemented for at least the next 10 to 20 years, at least if we follow the patterns of previous ICDs, and the diagnosis is so incredibly vague that it's gonna take even more years for health institutions to actually take this seriously and consider it to be a part of their disease classification standards. And while gaming addiction is indeed very real, to attribute their addiction into either the potential cause or potential factor of a mass shooter is incredibly disingenuous and utterly dishonest.
Video game sensibilities are also pervading other media. Pixar's Incredibles 2 was criticized this weekend for scenes featuring bright flashing lights. These effects not only evoke video games, but may also bother those prone to epileptic seizures.
I'm sorry, but what does Incredibles 2's seizure-reducing scene have to do with anything? I have no idea why this is even included. But by far, the most nuclear level of take from this entire gaming addiction saga is by none other than The Guardian.
The creators of the Fortnite craze have crossed an ethical line. This shoot-'em-up video game is so addictive that children have wet themselves rather than switch off.
And somehow that is the fault of Epic Games and the video game Fortnite instead of, I don't know, the parents of the child in question? This entire article is partly conjured by another article from the Daily Mail, where a 9-year-old girl is playing Fortnite so much she wet herself in her pants and hit her father the moment he tried to stop her and take her Xbox. And somehow this is the fault of the game rather than the freaking parents. One of the stupidest things that I found out is that not only the parents are incredibly terrible at parenting their child, monitoring their freaking playtime, and teaching them about personal responsibilities, but they're also terrible at their financial management as they let their child to spend around £50 a month in microtransactions. This article should have been a cautionary tale for parents to, for the love of God, monitor what kind of games that their children have been playing instead of just letting them freaking loose. But nope.
Sensible parenting should go a long way to solving the problem, obviously, but that doesn't help the children of parents who have either never learned to say no or are overwhelmed by their circumstances.
That still isn't video games to blame. The blame is still on you. Hate to break the bad news to you, but that's the reality of the situation. You raised the kid that you raised. Suffer the consequences.
There's a reason that effective regulation of booze and sugar has generally involved taking control out of parental hands, but the public health repertoire of age restrictions at point of sale, or sin taxes, don't transfer easily to free online games and apps.
Keep in mind that even with these regulations in place, there are still people drinking while being underage. It's almost like the government can't be your children's parents at all times.
What's left is piling pressure on the industry, making it commercially risky for them to ignore their social responsibilities. Can they really not devise more viral kids games that don't revolve around killing? And would the answer change if more developers were female?
There are two questions that you asked there. Can they really not devise more viral kids games that don't revolve around killing? Yes, Minecraft is still a thing, and Fortnite is not all entirely about killing. Would the answer change if more developers were female? I have no idea what you are trying to insinuate here. Are you saying that female game developers would make games that are less violent? There are so many Japanese game developers that would disagree with you on that.
There's nothing wrong with creating a product that kids want to use, but deliberately trying to get them hooked crosses an ethical line, which is why the concerns raised by Fortnite will be around long after the game itself has fallen out of fashion.
No, it didn't cross any ethical line, Guardian writer. It's you who puts a lot of the blame into Fortnite rather than the parents. So parents are overwhelmed that children that they didn't pay attention to and didn't parent well actually turn out to have mental disorders? Forgive me for being such an apathetic asshole, but I'm still gonna say it anyway because I'm just getting sick of this crap. Boo freaking hoo! The behaviors of your children are the results of your parenting. So if your children end up playing Fortnite and wet themselves, I think there's no one else responsible for this stupid thing other than you. Now, if your children have legit mental disabilities, you would have the right to complain. But these children are addicted to video games. They're not mental disabilities. That's what happens if you expose them to something fun and exciting. People get addicted to things. Addiction is something that pretty much everyone on this planet have suffered from. The key here is to make those people to control it. And a lot of people cannot control what they're addicted to, especially children. And since they're children, their number one source of guidance is their parents. parents, but you don't want to do their job and just blame the video game company instead. Epic Games, how dare you make a fun and exciting game that causes my daughter to get so addicted she wet herself and hit me if I take her Xbox away. How dare you make a free-to-play game with micropayments that my daughter wasted 50 pounds on it per month. How dare you, Epic Games? How dare you? To close this video, I just want to say that gaming addiction is indeed a real thing, and people who suffer from it really need to get help. But we can't exactly get people to help if the diagnosis of these addictions are not properly explained. We can't get these people to help if you lump people who are just your normal everyday gamer who plays video games as a hobby to be the one that has the disorder. And most importantly, parenting still plays a significant role in your children's growth. No matter how many irresponsible parents who work on journalistic outlets begging for the government to do their job so that they can sit on their asses say.